What did it really mean to be a Nazi? Beyond the visceral hatred of Jews, the swastika or the raised arm salute, Nazism was an ideological machine that molded thousands, shaping people from classroom instruction to the most intimate rituals of daily life. Nazism meant a worldview, the worship of the leader as a sacred figure, belief in racial superiority, absolute contempt for weakness, the exaltation of sacrifice, and war as a path to redemption. In this new documentary, we explore what it truly meant to be a Nazi, and how an entire society embraced an ideology that dehumanized the other and turned violence into a virtue.
Adolf Hitler had a very clear idea of what he considered to be a model citizen of the Third Reich. For him, a true and loyal Nazi would live and breathe the regime, incorporating it into every aspect of their lives. What they read, how they dressed, and even who they married would all be strictly controlled in order for them to conform to his ideals.
The roots of Nazism lie in the mud of Germany's 1918 defeat, when the Treaty of Versailles humiliated the country with unpayable reparations, lost territories, and an army reduced to impotence. In the turbulent streets of the Weimar Republic, amid runaway inflation, unemployment, and political violence, the seed of resentment took hold. In that broth of hatred and frustration, a man appeared ready to give it shape. Adolf Hitler. From 1921 as leader of the National Socialist Party, he filled squares and beer halls with speeches that mixed promises of greatness with apocalyptic warnings. It wasn't an isolated idea, but a machinery of resentment. Extreme nationalism cast Germany as the victim of internal and external conspiracies, demanded the restoration of lost honor, and called for expanding borders, annihilating enemies if necessary.
After World War I, the tragedy was when Germany was defeated, the overwhelming majority of the Germans never accepted being defeated. They believed in military victories, and they couldn't understand why in the final end they lost World War I. Then this propaganda came, stab in the back. We were betrayed, and who was responsible for this? Then they found the scapegoats, most of all the German Jews or others.
To this base, they added scientific racism, a pseudoscience that ranked peoples. At the top stood the Aryan race, pure, creative, destined to rule. Below were the Slavs, deemed natural slaves. And in the darkness, the Jews, accused of being parasites that weakened the nation. For the Nazis, history was a war between races. The Aryan race had to dominate. The others had to submit or disappear.
All other races and peoples, save the Jews, were viewed as occupying rungs below the Aryans in a sort of hierarchy of races. Various West Europeans, such as the French and Italians, were relatively high in the hierarchy, and others, particularly the Slavic peoples, very low. The Aryans' innate superiority granted them the right and obligation to rule over other races and peoples for the benefit of humankind.
This shows it was not only anti-Semitism, but a crusade against everything that challenged their worldview. Yet on the other side of supposedly pure Germans, the Jews bore the worst of it, nor were Jews their only enemy.
The Jews, in complete contrast, were seen as a kind of anti-race, dangerous inhuman beings in seemingly human form. They were viewed alternatively as microbes and parasites, or as devils, that is, inhuman creatures with superhuman power, a threat to the very existence of the world, a danger of cosmic proportions. And radical danger required a radical, total, and irreversible solution.
Communism, with its promise of equality among men, was seen as an unnatural perversion that destroyed hierarchies dictated by blood. From that came the Judeo-Bolshevik conspiracy. The claim that Jews and communists were a single enemy, infiltrated in unions, universities, parties to destroy Germany from within. This hatred distilled into slogans and myths such as blood and soil, joining racial purity to the right to conquer territory. And into Lebensraum, the living space that justified expansion eastward, where entire peoples would be expelled or annihilated to make way for Aryan settlers. That was the North Star set by Adolf Hitler for a Germany seeking to rise from Versailles. It was the first stone of his plan to become leader. But there was more.
Important aspect in the spirit supporting Hitler was that the overwhelming majority of the Germans were not Democrats. They didn't understand what does it mean, a democratic political system. They believed in an authoritarian system, obedience, honor, greatness of Germany, and so the parliamentarian system they don't like very much.
Little by little, Hitler elevated his figure. Torchlit marches, swastikas on every corner, martial music. Each element fed a ritual designed to replace individual identity with a collective one, fused into the idea of nation and race. The enemy was everywhere, and Nazism stood ready to confront it to fulfill its destiny. The eruption of Hitler seemed like long-awaited salvation, and before realizing that following the Führer meant dragging the world into war, figures like the aviator Franz Schall greeted his rise with enthusiasm.
Bald weht frischer Wind in Deutschland und es wird manches anders werden. Es kam für uns etwas plötzlich. Ich selbst bin noch halb ungläubig. Welche Möglichkeiten tun sich jetzt auf? Hitler an des Reiches Spitze, für das er 14 Jahre lang fanatisch und zielsicher gekämpft hat. Jetzt soll Deutschland einen Mann kennenlernen, der aus Not und Schmach ein Volk schmieden wird, das der Welt endlich Trotz bieten kann.
Agreeing with the Third Reich's outlook was only the first step. A crucial part of being a Nazi was understanding that Adolf Hitler was not just a leader, but a modern prophet, a god of flesh and blood. In Germany, the Führer did not simply govern, he guided, inspired, and, for millions, redeemed. Propaganda presented him as the providential man who had rescued the nation from humiliation, the architect of its economic and military resurgence. In a country scarred by Weimar chaos, hunger and instability, Hitler became the embodiment of order and hope. Entire crowds saw him that way.
Unserem Führer, unserem Reichskanzler Adolf Hitler, ein dreifaches Heil. Wir waren wie berauscht vor Begeisterung, geblendet vom Licht der Fackeln vor unseren Gesichtern, immer in ihrem Dunst, wie in einer süßen Wolke von Weihrauch. Juda verrecke wurde auch mal gerufen und vom Judenblut gesungen, das vom Messer spritzen sollte.
This phenomenon had a name: Führerprinzip, the leadership principle. According to it, the state and the people were united in a pyramid of obedience culminating in a single figure. The Führer's word outweighed any written law or institution. Every utterance from Hitler was doctrine. Every gesture, an order. Loyalty to his person was not optional. It was sacred, absolute, unquestionable. Hitler laid out his vision in Mein Kampf. Blending autobiography, political program, and racial prophecy, he presented himself as the chosen one to fulfill a historical destiny. Free Germany from enemies, internal and external, and lead the Aryan race to its highest splendor. That text became required reading for officials, teachers, and members of state institutions, reinforcing the idea that the Führer's will was the nation's destiny. In the Third Reich, thinking differently was treason. The state structure was reshaped to eliminate any space for doubt or dissent. The press was controlled, education indoctrinated, the arts censored, and justice subordinated. Judges no longer interpreted laws, they interpreted the will of the Führer. Even the army, traditionally loyal to the state, was forced to swear personal obedience to Hitler, not to the Constitution or to Germany. And those on the other side of the street watched nightfall before their eyes.
Breslau, 9. März. Das Bild der Stadt ist ganz verändert dadurch, dass von allen öffentlichen Gebäuden Hakenkreuzflaggen wehen. Wie unser einem zumute ist, wenn diese Flagge gepriesen wird, sei es nur unter Druck. Diese Flagge, unter der wir Juden aufs Schwerste beschimpft wurden und werden. Die Menschen sind wie in einem Taumel.
While some were persecuted, the cult of the leader grew in almost religious rituals. Torchlight parades lit the night. Mass rallies in Nuremberg saw tens of thousands repeat his words like a creed. Portraits hung in every office and classroom. A daily liturgy erased the individual and fused him into the crowd. Hitler did not merely issue orders, he dictated meaning. His victories were celebrated as miracles, his defeats justified as trials on the path to final triumph. His figure stood above error. Questioning him was inconceivable. Nazism thus created not only a totalitarian state, but a political faith with its messiah, its dogma, and its heresy. In that faith, obedience was not debated, it was practiced to the last consequence. With each step, every German became one more soldier of the brutal war that was coming.
You didn't need Nazi ideologues. You didn't need professional anti-Semites. You didn't need people who had been incorporated in the Nazi movement. That other factors were at work that allow a regime like the Nazis to harness all sorts of people in the population to become complicit in their policies of mass murder.
Sowing ideas and molding beliefs was one of Hitler's great talents and that of his inner circle. In that work, not even the smallest were exempt. German children did not play at being generic heroes. They played at being Nazis. From classroom to home, childhood was hijacked by ideology. The regime understood that conquering the future meant shaping those who would inhabit it, and it did so with precision. In schools, teachers were purged or co-opted. Those who refused to swear loyalty to the Führer lost their jobs. Those who remained became agents of indoctrination, Textbooks did not teach history, they taught purity, war, and obedience.
The Jew wants you to look at him as just another person, but he does not look at you that way. He is your enemy. Do you know why? Because you are superior to him. You are special. You belong to something special. He is your brother. All of you are brothers. The same blood runs through your veins. The blood of the greatest race on the face of this earth.
Biology classes explained the science of races. Aryan superiority, perfect skulls, blood as the bearer of destiny. In history classes, Germany appeared as the victim of a Jewish and communist conspiracy. Books like Der Giftpilz, The Poisonous Mushroom, portrayed Jews as pests, dangerous to the social body. Being a child in the Reich meant growing up to hate, march, and kill. But the classroom was not enough.
Every apparatus of education and indoctrination was used by the Nazis. Boys and girls joined the Hitler Youth or the League of German Maidens. It was German Teachers' Organization.
A lot of the areas of life that we would consider the private sphere, actually the Nazis penetrated those areas. So into the family, into traditional education. There was a lot of indoctrination from quite early on in young people's lives.
The Hitler Youth became the second home of millions. From barely 20,000 members in 1932, it swelled to about 8 million by 1940. There, community erased social classes. Children of workers and aristocrats wore the same uniform, sang the same songs, and swore to serve the Führer. Activities mixed sports with pre-military training. Camps, marches, games that taught geography, recognition signals, and basic weapons handling. All with one goal: prepare youth physically and mentally for war and for sacrifice. Girls had their own organization, the League of German Girls, where they learned that their mission was not to fight, but to strengthen the race. Care for the home, be mothers to Aryan children, and transmit faith in the Führer.
Himmler's orders, the first Reich Bride School was established in 1937. There, women were molded into model Nazi wives, taught the importance of race and genetics, and above all, to pledge allegiance to Adolf Hitler.
It was a residential school. You went for 6 weeks and you stayed there, and at the end of it you had to take a certificate. You had to learn all sorts of things like cooking and childcare and how to obey a man properly.
Propaganda completed the siege. Joseph Goebbels, Minister of Propaganda, turned Germany into a permanent political theater. Books, radio, cinema, posters, and rallies flooded daily life with a single set of messages. Films like The Eternal Jew did not seek to entertain, they sought to sow revulsion. Radio, cheap and accessible, repeated speeches and filtered news. Posters, omnipresent, glorified strength and denounced the enemy. Everything was designed to neutralize the individual and mold the collective conscience. Thinking for oneself became a luxury few dared to afford. Repeating what was learned turned into an act of social survival. In that Germany, childhood was not a time of innocence, but a stage of preparation for a life devoted to serving an idea that admitted no debate. The Reich did not only want soldiers for its army, it wanted believers for its cause. Even so, not everyone believed, though many kept quiet under the fear Nazism knew how to instill. Nazi ideology did not only manufacture loyal warriors and convinced fanatics, it also molded docile citizens and servile elites. At the top, an elite trained in the regime's best academies produced leaders chosen for talent, little aristocrats of the Reich. They were young people prepared to command, design policies, and carry out Hitler's project with cold discipline and without remorse. Meanwhile, most of the population learned to fit in. Some embraced the ideology with genuine enthusiasm. Others adapted their actions, their silences, and even their affections to survive. Propaganda served as the mirror in which the ordinary German saw himself as superior, part of a chosen people rising against degenerate and traitorous enemies. In that setting, everyday horror was normalized. Racial laws, deportations, rumors about camps and disappearances all became background noise many preferred not to hear. Obedience and indoctrination ensured that, while the elite designed hatred, the masses executed it, or at least tolerated it. Not everyone needed to be a Nazi. It was enough for the majority to remain silent. Fear of the Gestapo, of denunciations by neighbors, of losing one's job or endangering one's family, led millions to practice prudent neutrality.
A woman in a neighboring flat you thought was a bit odd and strange, didn't have a boyfriend, you told your suspicions to the Gestapo, they'd come and take her away. Anyone who just seemed a bit out of the ordinary was under suspicion. And yes, children could denounce parents, denounce relatives, denounce friends. This is how Nazi Germany operated. That was its organizing principle, denunciation.
A neighbor arrested, a shop shuttered as Jewish property, a co-worker who stopped showing up at the factory. Such signs rarely sparked public protest. Silence felt safer. In the spheres of power, Nazi dignitaries enjoyed privileges unthinkable for ordinary citizens. Confiscated residences, luxuries gained through plunder, travel, and access to resources during rationing. While millions measured out bread and coal, high officials toasted with champagne at private receptions. Planning military operations or extermination policies with the coldness of administrative calculation. The masses, convinced or fearful, served as passive support. Some participated actively in denunciations, pogroms, or deportations. Others looked the other way, believing that as long as they followed the script, they would be safe. The Reich's machinery needed both parts, an elite that set the agenda and a social base that sustained it, out of fanaticism or inertia. Thus, Nazi Germany was both a project engineered for hatred and a silent pact between power and submission. An entire country became a mechanism where faith, comfort, or fear kept the machine running. Each person knew his role, because being a Nazi was not just wearing a uniform or repeating slogans, it was living immersed in a worldview that turned hatred into virtue and obedience into destiny. It was a condition imposed by a totalitarian state that molded consciences, emotions, and behaviors with chilling precision. Understanding that reality does not excuse its crimes, it means recognizing how consent to horror was manufactured, from school propaganda, and the cult of the leader to the fear that paralyzed. The Third Reich reminds us that barbarism does not arise out of nowhere. It is prepared, taught, and normalized long before extermination camps appear. It begins in the minds of those taught to see the other as an enemy and violence as a duty. Thus, we come to the end. If you like this video, we'll be waiting for you in our next installment of War Documents.